All right, so let's get started. Um, you guys know me. I was both were here last time. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to talk about the seasonal life cycle of the honeybee. Um, well, we're going to review the individual life cycle really quick, just so to draw the line to talk about the distinction of what we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to go through this really complicated flow chart about the seasonality of the life cycle. So last Tuesday we talked about the egg, the larva, the pupa, the capped brood, and how and then out emerges an adult honeybee. Um, we talked about how the genetics of the queen are the same as a worker bee. It's just that they've raised that young larva as a queen versus as a larva. Um, so, um, and we talked about how, and then we went into how workers go through different tasks throughout the season. Um, that's important to know and to understand that there's a difference between that and the seasonality of the honeybee colony. So what I was trying to get to as with the individual life cycle is that to understand the um, to continue that analogy that I used before of the tomato plant, like the roots, the stem, the flower, the fruit kind of thing. We all know the parts of a plant and how a tomato is produced. Now we need to understand that it would be extremely silly to put seeds into the ground right now in February. You can read a book and say you put the seeds in the ground in the soil. Well, it would be very bad to put the seeds into the ground right now in February. So to understand the seasonality of that tomato plant is also another extremely important thing to be able to grow tomatoes successfully. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the seasonality of the honeybee colony so that you're not doing a task outside of the season. Um, so I have this really complicated flow chart here. We're going to break it down and digest it piece by piece by piece. And we're really going to build it again. And starting with the winter, um, right now in February, the bees are dormant um, in a cluster, as you see here, of about 20,000, 30,000 bees. That cluster is at its center, 95 degrees. That is where the queen is. She's starting to lay right now some eggs to build that overall population. And for this talk, when I say the population is growing, to increase the population, things associated to the word population, what I'm referring to is the population of the individual honeybee colony. So all these bees are going to grow in number from now to um, mid-March when the dandelions bloom. And it's really that point in itself makes the honeybee. The honeybees produce honey because they build up now in February. Um, so it's the fact that they're growing their population now to enable them to exploit early nectar sources come March and April. Things like a bumblebee. Right now, bumblebee queens are still frozen in leaf litter. By the time that the dandelions bloom, they need to emerge, and they're a population of one. And then they're a population of two, then 4, 8, 16. and it's very slow to get there. Right now, my population of honeybees is 30,000. So it's that growth now that's going to enable me come May to make a lot of honey. And it's really the dandelions. The dandelions here, I'm mentioning what is a as a buildup nectar. What I mean by that is you don't really see honey that you can harvest from the dandelion plant, but they bring that nectar in, and instead of dehydrating it and making it into honey, they consume all of those calories right away and create and build that population using the dandelion calories. This is also the time, if you're a second-year beekeeper, that you want to put your water source out. When people still have the covers on their pools, but it's a little bit warm, that's when you're going to get your water sources out, because if the bees will find a water source in early spring and use that water source throughout the entire season. So you really want to get them honed in on one particular water source early in the season, this time of the season. So this is like a little dog bath, kiddie pool thing with some logs, a bunch of salt so that mosquitoes don't grow, right next to hives, kind of thing. And so just to, I actually had this year 5 little water sources, and this one was the one that worked best. Bees need something to drink. They need moisture, not water. So these logs is really what they drink the water off of. And it's just some fun facts. So we're going to take 2 routes here, from building that large population. What could happen if left to their own demise, or left to their own mechanisms, they will swarm. And that's the route that we're going to go with first. And what that means, what swarming means is half the bees leave the colony with the overwinter mated queen. So that mated queen has sperm in her so that she can start laying eggs right away. And they'll hang out on a tree. They'll find a hollow cavity, a tree, this person's house in Westwood, to take up roost and create a new colony. And what they'll do when they're in that wall, they'll start to build wax in that wall. And that queen, because she's already mated, will start to grow the population of bees back up. And so they halved. They're about 15 to 20,000 versus what they could have been. They could have been 30 to 40,000 if they would have all stayed home. And they're gonna grow and be another honeybee colony. And being in New Jersey, more often than not, when they swarm and they find a cavity, it's less often a tree and more somebody's house. So us knowing that in New Jersey, this is something that we really want to manipulate and to avoid. But it's important to understand that it's something, if you did nothing, they'll swarm in early spring, kind of early May. So let's talk about the other half of the colony.
Wait, I have a question. So, because you have hives that you're managing, it's less likely that the queen will leave and it will form, a swarm will form. Is that true?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's less likely, but not impossible that they'll do it. It's the term, like I use the word swarm management. and not swarm prevention. So it's swarm management, not swarm prevention measures, because you can't prevent it, but you can manage it. So we can do things so that they don't swarm, okay? And we can manage the case of it. So like I have 100 hives, and if I do everything perfectly, um, maybe one will swarm, okay? If I slacked off, half of them would swarm. If I did nothing, all of them would swarm. And so with a person's one or two colonies, in or you really want to um, know that swarming is something that's such a it's instinctual of the bee. That is their reproduction measure. That is what they want to do. Okay. Um, and it's really important to understand what happens when they do it, because it's complicated and it's fun. And that's how it's how more bees like how I can take my hives and make I can take 100 hives and make them be 200 hives, and that kind of thing. So I want to talk about what would happen if they're left up to their own demise versus what would happen if when we manage them. So when they're left up to their own demise or wishes or whatever I'm saying. The other half, what is called what's termed to be the parent colony. Um, and it's funny that it's called the parent colony because it's actually a new daughter queen that's left behind to be raised to continue that colony. So this is the boxes in your backyard, whereas the swarm is in your neighbor's house, kind of thing. So the parent colony will raise a new queen. Um, and so if you see here, this peanut is a new queen. If you see this little half peanut with the little, it's open, that's another queen cell that just isn't fully developed all the way. So this one's on its way. Um, this hive was in the tree. I'm pretty sure that the swarm photo that I have is because this hive swarmed. Um, so this is the parent colony. A new queen is left to grow. That new queen then emerges. She goes out. She mates with 15 to 25 drones. She comes back and she stays in the hive for the rest of her life. All right, laying eggs, keeping the population of bees of that colony going. Now she stays in that hive for the rest of her life unless she swarms in the spring next year. But mating with the 20 to 25 drones is when she leaves the colony. So you see here in the top of the photo is my queen with the really long abdomen because she was well mated with drones. So that's a 25 to 25 drone queen. And if she was mated, if the time of year, if they swarmed and then you just get 20 days of rain, well, then she's unable to go out and mate with any drones. And then you're running into all kinds of issues. So this is a perfect scenario where she mates and she has the sperm to continue the colony. So this big green arrow is cutting the line of swarming, and it's both to the colony grows in population and stores away honey. Storing away honey. So the honeybee stores about 60 pounds of honey for their own calorie consumption over the winter. And then in New Jersey, we can make about 60 pounds of honey per hive for our consumption. So what they really make is about 120 pounds. But if they swarm, a bunch of energy is lost into swarming and then remating and all this kinds of stuff, where they only get to make their honey for their own honey stores. If we manipulate the biology and we prevent swarming, I made this arrow big and green because that's money for us and that's honey for us. Because then we get, if we reduce swarming, we get more honey. And the one of the most major ways that I found to reduce the swarming mechanism um, is what's called early supering. So this is almost, I want to say, April or May 15th. This photo was taken, and I put a bunch of boxes on these strong hives above a queen excluder. Now, a queen excluder is kind of a screen that the queen can't move up into. So I'm not going to have eggs all the way up here. I'm keeping her down here. And so what this does is the colony says, "Oh my God, look at all this space that we're not occupying. We're super weak. We're not strong enough to swarm. We can't swarm. We have all this space here to lay eggs, and we need to store honey because we have no honey here next to our everything, you know." But so they tried to fill the space with honey, and they never run out of room, so they don't swarm. So we kind of trick them into being weak when they're really not weak, and keep them in the hives and out of the trees. And we prevent them from swarming. Um, and that's what I found successful. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next. We're going to talk about queen excluders in the next talk, because I'm gonna talk about really what it means to be a good beekeeper, in being a good beekeeper to your fellow non-beekeepers. Um, so it's all about making them think that they're strong when they're really not. When they make them think that they're not strong when they really are. So here we have a honey harvest. Between these frames here, you can see that white wax. All that white wax is really new wax, and that's in these cells in these frames are all full of honey. I have an extractor pouring out the golden sweet stuff. And then what happens really during what's like our drought season is what we would call a dearth. It's a time without nectar. There's a seasonal decline in the overall population of the bees in the colony, and that's really a reaction to, they know that winter isn't coming right now, and that they also know that there's no nectar available out in the in the trees. Everything's dry. So this is August kind of thing, and the population of the colony goes down a little bit. A beekeeper can prevent that from feeding them a little bit of sugar water back, kind of to stimulate them, and that's what we're doing here with this orange box. Is actually we're feeding them a little sugar water to make them think that there's a little bit of a nectar coming in, so that we don't have this seasonal population decline to save energy, because they don't need to save energy because we're giving them the energy through sugar syrup. And it's not enough to really have them make honey. It's just enough to keep their population up, kind of like the dandelion I mentioned before. And then what happens in the fall, late August, early September, with goldenrod and other nectar sources, there's actually kind of like a second boom um, in the northern part of the state. As you go further south, um, really after you cross the Raritan River in New Jersey, there's less of this fall increase of population. Um, but we have goldenrod blooming, we have knotweed blooming, which makes the bees build up a lot and store away of their last bits of honey as they can. Um, their population will grow a little bit because that queen will start to lay more eggs. And then we go into winter um, with a large, robust colony and starting the cycle again. Um, so why do we talk about all of that? Why is it important to know that there is a seasonal decline in population in August? Why is it important to know that um, they're slowly building up now until March? And that's really because what we're going to cover in our fourth talk is the varroa mites. It's all about pest and disease management on that end also. Um, Knowing that swarming is something that would come if you did nothing, super important. And then understanding that there's little changes in the population throughout the year is key. So what you see here on the left is me putting in Apivar. It's a strip of plastic that has a chemical that is slowly released through 50 days. And as the bees walk over it, the mites die. A varroa mite is kind of like a deer tick-like pest to the honeybee. So what I'm doing there is in January, I'm putting them in the hives to uh, as they build up coming for the coming spring, I'm making sure that all the varroa mites are dead in that. Um, Here we are in December last year. Because there's no brood in the hive, I'm able to use a different chemical treatment, which is called oxalic acid. This is all stuff that I'm going to cover in pests and diseases. And see here, I got the Apivar strips on the ground because I took them out. Um, we're gassing them, which is the oxalic acid vapor. So we're all wearing respirators, and um, and that and that works great on that time of year. And this is formic acid. This is in July because it's better when the temperature is 50 to 80 degrees, whereas this is useless when there's any sort of brood in the hive, whereas this is useless if you want to harvest honey. So to understand that this crazy um, flow chart, it especially this seasonal population decline, this population incline come fall, and the incline come spring is important come when we want to medicate them, because this time of year, this half a year, spring and summer, we want to be able to harvest honey. We can't use chemical agents that aren't allowed when honey is being made in the hive, kind of thing. um, I think that might have been a lot to confuse you, but it's just that this flow chart, to just understand that like what's going on is a big deal come pest disease, and it's all really a buildup to that pest and disease talk, understanding these life cycles and things like that. Um, so that's kind of all I have now. Is it still just three of us? It is just the three of us. Um, what I want to talk about is the next talk on the 18th. I'm going to talk about the New Jersey beekeeping regulation. I'm going to talk about what keeping bees in populated areas really means. So I have two hives in my backyard in suburban Dumont. I need to do different things in these hives than I have to do out in Blairstown, in more rural areas. If my bees out in Blairstown swarm, it's not on the news. Whereas my bees in Dumont swarm and they land on the wrong person's car, it's really on the news, and it's an issue. We really want to work hard to not do that. And then I'm going to finally talk about equipment. And I do apologize with the last two talks. I'm using jargon like frames and queen excluders and boxes. Um, what I actually might do is I might bring a hive into my room here and be on video and like hold it up and talk about it like with you. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna cover equipment. Um, Pages in the book that's on the syllabus that talk about equipment are there, and I think one of these two, I think it might be the shorter one of the two, talks about keeping bees in populated areas. Um, Part of the New Jersey beekeeping regulation is that new beekeepers need to take a beekeeping class. So they they define it way too soft for my liking. And so like, what does that even mean? Um, so I made a class that is very rigorous, and I have assignments. Um, so here's an assignment. If you were to, um, it honestly, it's from my learning. For when I was learning, I drew out the flow chart of the honeybee life cycle. Um, and if you were to make a flow chart of your own using a virgin queen, an unmated queen, I think I said in the talk, a drone, where do the drones come in? The mated queen, where's the mated queen out in that life cycle? Swarm, try throwing other terminologies. Um, Take a picture of that printer papers that you drew the life cycle on and put it on that Facebook, the HarBee education group. And if you're the first person, everybody can cheat off you. If you're the last person, you can cheat off of everybody else. It's really not, if you're gonna physically draw it out with your hand, you'd be learning. If you don't have Facebook, feel free to email it to me using a subject line, including something like online class question, something like that. To use the word "be" in a um, subject line for me is all the subject lines of my emails include "be," so it's kind of tough. Um, and then I kind of just want to mention again, and I'm gonna do this every time at the end of the talks. So this was a free talk. It's paid for by honey and candle sales. Though if you're really enjoying these talks, the way to help other people find me is to write a review on Facebook, to share something on Instagram, Google. The more Google touches on the internet, the more links to my website, the more links out of my website, the higher the rating on Google. If you were to buy a product, love it, hate it, whatever, to rate it on the website. Again, I'm using the big green arrow because this is 5 stars. Big green arrow means money for me. But yeah, I just if you're enjoying yourself, to write a review on Google. So I'm gonna stop recording